Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have returning to Engaging the Phenomenon, a friend and colleague, Nathaniel Wear. So welcome back.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'll link the previous discussion that I had with Nathaniel here. But Nathaniel is an organizer and representative of CE-5 and disclosure outreach. And here we're going to talk about it in the context of CE5 and disclosure as a citizens initiative. So, just for people watching and listening to this, how would you frame the CE5 and disclosure outreach?
So essentially, it would be any proactive idea that you can implement in your community to help raise awareness, help raise public awareness as to what's really going on. And that can be a number of ways, be done in a number of ways. Some people are more comfortable setting up a table in a high traffic area, whereas some people are more comfortable with passing out pamphlets in business cards with QR codes to, let's say, Dr. Greer's new website, the dpiarchive.com. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of how we conduct outreach.
And this is going to sound like a very basic question, but I know people will be thinking it, and it will also add context. Is like, why should people participate in a CE5 and disclosure outreach?
Well, if in our opinion, if you are familiar with the Disclosure Project or the CE-5 initiative, CE-5 contact, you're one of very few people in your community who is aware of these subjects. Therefore, what we consider it to be an ambassadorial responsibility to help raise the awareness in your local community.
Yeah, and again, the term psionic has come up more recently in that, people are basically using the term psionic as a application of psi phenomenon. So, with that, we had the Jake Barber story, very akin to what we would consider CE5 or what has been considered CE5 since at least the 1990s. So, with that said, how would you explain CE5 to somebody that is just getting interested in these subjects, right? Maybe they're just familiar with disclosure, the idea that UFOs are real, UFOs represent a form of non-human intelligence, and that they have been engaging with humanity. And to quote Colonel Carl Nell, there's zero doubt. uh, so if somebody's just familiar with the idea of disclosure, how would you describe CE5 to them?
It's a good question. I do want to just first touch on the psionic CE5 whole ordeal there. I'm not opposed to the term. However, as Dr. Greer has commonly said, words do have meaning. I mean, anybody could agree with that. When it comes to um, other contact initiatives like Rama, I think it really doesn't matter what the term is. It really matters what the intent is. And so, in describing CE5, to answer your question, I think it really boils down to your intent. Is it heartfelt? Is it altruistic? And so really it's a human initiated contact where humans send out an invitation through various modalities or phases like light, sound, thought, in this case for C5. And then, uh, if the intent is pure, then the extraterrestrials come the other halfway. And that's, in a nutshell, CE5. I mean, there's a lot to it. There's protocols. There's, various ways that you can facilitate the mind to, um, you know, have a successful contact event. But that would be my answer for C5.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you feel about at least like the Jake Barber story and testimony coming out? I mean, I think it's timely. Uh, I think that it will, you know, ultimately the introduction of psionic terminology and Jake Barber's testimony will ultimately get people interested in the idea of, again, what we would consider CE-5. So, I mean, what's your take on the development of Jake Barber coming forward as a first-hand whistleblower of the crash retrieval, but further beyond that, the idea that he's sharing testimony regarding psionic contact.
Yeah. So, I think there are aspects of what he shared with the public that are, um, not just legitimate. That's already been verified, but I think that there are, um, parts of what he's sharing as far as the psionics that are meaningful, but there are concerns. I kind of have some concerns, and I think that we should probably sit back and just see how it unfolds before going all in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is the whole aspect of their, you know, vector rather than vectoring in or sending out an invitation, they're some of the terms that they've used, such as um, yeah, such as
Summon?
summoning. Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
like, what is that word?
Yeah.
No, it's not a common word that we use in CE-5. So summoning to me sounds, it sounds like you're, I don't know. I'm just at the point where I want to see how it unfolds before we, put all our eggs in that basket. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I know Jake Barber has clarified a bit in the sense that, he's just using that as a word. Again, Greer's point was that words do matter, and I do understand. The words that you use have they have a subtlety to them and an inference, and he might be saying it in a harmless or well-intentioned way, but people that are watching and listening may hear that word and make their own inferences that don't correlate what he's trying to communicate. And that's the kind of thing about language. And I see the all the issues with that, but I do think that Jake seems well intentioned in what he's trying to do and what the Skywatcher initiative is trying to do in trying to, number one, validate the idea of psionic contact or CE-5 or contact work, the psionic component to contact, and not just contact, but the nature of reality, as such, and and then collect evidence of this kind of interaction and non-human intelligence in general. So ultimately, it seems like a good thing, but like you said, we just have to see how it develops.
yeah, I
Uh,
will say it certainly seems that he is well intended in his efforts, but yeah, just got to see what happens. Dr. Greer has been doing it for 33 years, 34 years, of which 16 I've, had the pleasure of being able to study his work. And, this guy coming out on the scene, I just need a little bit more information personally as a investigator to kind of make an accurate assessment on what I think, his uh, ultimate motives and agenda is. So we'll see.
yeah, I mean, it was very interesting that he did mention Stephen Greer in his testimony. I think that actually shocked a lot of people, and he actually has a short history in the last two or so years with Stephen Greer into how he ended up coming public, right? So that was really interesting, and I thought it was pretty bold of him to go out of his way in a sense to include that part of the story when he could have just said nothing about it. So I thought that was, props to him for keeping it real. Uh, so,
Agreed.
you know, Oh, so in regards to CE5, uh, and the the CE5 disclosure outreach, what you've been doing this now for a number of years. How when did you start this?
Oh, the outreach began in 2014. It was just a small group of friends. There was four of us. We just, decided to print out some banners, get some materials from, Dr. Greer's website, put them on a table under a canopy, set up next to the university where we all lived close by. And we didn't really, it's kind of premature in that we didn't really have an idea of how we were going to conduct the outreach, but we knew that we were going to give it our best, and it turned out to be what we consider a success in that there were a number of students that stopped by and just random pedestrians as well. So yeah, 2014 is when it started.
And I mean, since then, what have been some of the developments?
Well, 10 years passed and we started back up in 2024. And I think in that, that span of time, a decade, we learned a lot of, just life, not just life skills, but, also, a greater acumen in the subject as a whole. And that enabled us to better describe or explain, what we consider to be what's really going on to the public. But also, we knew that there, a lot of people who may be interested in this form of disclosure wouldn't be comfortable with, an interaction like you and I could have with people and being, kind of very well versed in these subjects. So we knew that we had to come up with some materials that weren't just the documents that, sometimes are 7, 8 pages long. They have to be something short, sweet, kind of like, today's world where you're scrolling and it's just a short, sweet video. So we came up with pamphlets and brochures, and it's kind of the primary way that we're seeing that people are getting involved in outreach. And if people at any point want to interact and want to learn more, you can have a dialogue then. But if they don't, you just simply are able to give them something tangible and they can look it up on their own later on.
And do you guys have any kind of forthcoming developments that are coming up soon?
Yeah, so yeah, all the materials that we put together are a culmination of ambassadors, ideas from ambassadors around the world. And out of respect, we submitted them to the Disclosure Project request, as a submittal, requesting approval, and they reviewed and approved a number of them, most of them actually, and they're now available for public distribution. But furthermore, they're looking to include them on Dr. Greer's website, the shop, so people can get these materials and begin to conduct outreach in their own communities. So that's a huge development. It's still underway. It's not a for sure thing yet, but it is. It certainly seems as if it will be. So.
And I don't know if you were going to make any kind of formal announcement, but you are working on a podcast.
Oh yeah, and so we also have a podcast that is going to be specifically for CE-5 ambassadors, contactees, people who are in alignment. And this is specifically for our channel, people who are in alignment with contact that is peaceful and believe that any extraterrestrial biological entity that's making their way to our neck of the woods are not hostile. So those are the kind of people that we want to have on our podcast to share their story. I think that the C5 community has grown so much, so it's a perfect platform for people to come and share their experiences. Um,
Yeah,
you know, Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say I mean I think back in like 2009 or so there was maybe like a few hundred people that were really in the at least at that time the C-SETI network.
Yeah.
And now it's just like it's just thousands and it's tens of thousands at the very least.
Yeah. I remember looking up, the CE-5 initiative online. I think Ricky Butterfast is the one who told me about it, and that's how we got connected. And,
Yeah.
at that time, if you looked anywhere else, you weren't able to find like CE-5 Alberta or CE-5 France. Whereas now you can pretty much put any major city or metropolitan area or what have you and find a CE-5 group, and they're constantly popping up. So it's crazy to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, because originally it was I created the CE5 initiative group because at that time, like the only thing going on was the CSETI forum. And I don't know if you remember that, but it was on the old cseti.org
Yeah.
website, and it was like a few dozen people. And maybe of those few dozen people, there were like maybe 20 or 30 who were actually active. And I had just gotten onto social media and I was social networking, and I was like, man, this would be so much easier if it was just on social networking at that time on Facebook. So I created the CE5 initiative group there, and I started coordinating uh, at that time with Debbie Foch. I don't know if you remember Debbie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
she was Dr. Greer's main assistant back then, and I was coordinating with Debbie all the time and talking with her and learning from her. And I told her about it, and I was like, okay, let's like, do you know any of the people from the working groups that you can link me up with so I can tell them about this? And when that group started off, it was really just some of the working group leaders and people from the CSETI forum, right? And I, like you said, that was like there was maybe like 100, 200 people in the beginning of that. And now it's like you could find a CSETI group in probably every state in the United States and other countries. So the grassroots, everything from word of mouth to I have to say, especially the feature films that Dr. Stephen Greer did spread major awareness on CE5.
Yeah.
So again, we've been talking about CE5. I we have been talking about the psionic term and all that. So for people watching and listening, if they're like, "Oh wow, CE5, like what can I do if I'm interested in the idea of human initiated contact? How can they, from your experience and your practice, how can they practice CE5? Let's start there.
That's a great question. So there's two, places that we like to refer people to, and that is number one, the app, the CE5 contact app, that kind of gives you pretty much everything you need to successfully conduct a CE5. But then also to watch, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. I think that that's another good place for people to kind of go down the rabbit hole, if it were. And if they're really engaged, what I like, to share with people, especially if they're green, is some of the position papers that Dr. Greer has put together. In my opinion, that's a wealth of knowledge, to have to really have an understanding of what's going on, at least in the modern context. So, um, you know, that those are really the three places that we like to refer them to, but it's really all dependent on the individual themselves. I mean, we will, um, we always say that we would rather individual steer the direction of the conversation. So it's just whatever they're ready for. Sometimes there's no words need to be spoken; they just take a card and go. So
Yeah. And in regards to CE5, um, you have the CE5 protocols, which are, yeah, I appreciate the CE5 protocols because they're structured and they're a fail-safe way to get involved in CE5 as a whole, right? Yeah, I'm just going to differentiate a little bit and say you have CE5 as a whole, which is human initiated contact, and then you have the CE5 protocols, which are Dr. Stephen Greer's method in which to do that. So, I like to refer to them at the very least as training wheels. So if people have no familiarity at all with how to go about it, you can follow a very structured path of A, B, C. I'm going to do a 20, 30-minute meditation, maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, depends on you. You could, I'll speak at minimal here. You can start and you can do a 20-minute meditation after you're in a tranquil state, I'll say. Uh, you do what he calls coherent thought sequencing. He's also referred to it as remote viewing level 2, which is a way to either remote view or visualize in a coherent sequence, from your location to the Earth, above your area to outer space, the solar system, and then to out in the galaxy, and then to detect or get the attention of any non-human intelligence, or as he would say, extraterrestrial intelligence. He's adamant about that. And to invite them to interact and then to use
In
that
a
same,
safe and peaceful way, of
yeah,
course. Yep.
yeah, in a safe and peaceful way. Uh, and as he would say, and also warning them like, hey, listen, just so you know that we have weapon systems here that might target you, so be
Yeah.
careful. And then vector them or invite them back using that same visual sequence in reverse. And then, so, generally speaking, uh, you're going to do a short meditation. You're going to do that coherent thought sequence for, back and forth for another 20 minutes or so. And then, again, if you'd like, you can use different technology to also vector them closer to the site. People have used lights. I'll just say lights, and radio frequencies to also try to get their attention. And basically that's the contact trilogy. And that's one method of doing it. There's for every individual, they're ultimately, after getting enough experience, going to develop their own method of CE-5 that are could be similar to the CE-5 protocols or could be completely different. So uh, yeah, I don't want people to get hung up on just the protocols, although they're like an excellent starting place because of their structure. Um, and just because it works, right? Um,
I think, just to add to that, Dr. Greer on many occasions has said it's not a one way or no way kind of, approach. It's kind of, like, email. Some people use Yahoo, some people use Gmail, in the end, you're still able to send an email. I don't know if that's the greatest analogy, but, um, and and Dr. Greer is not opposed to other people having their own ways to either facilitate the mind or make contact. So, I just stick with the CE-5 because that's what I'm, spent, a great portion of, my studies in. And so, as long as the intent is pure, I think that's what matters.
right. And I think ultimately, maybe not even the goal, but ultimately, when you're familiar enough, there is no protocol. You're just familiar enough with the sensation and the contact itself or the interaction itself that it's just, once I mean, again, I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but once you start the process of contact and interaction, you kind of have an open line there. So, uh, you know, the the protocol, as it were, becomes less relevant because the connection's already made. So, not to worry people, but that is part of the deal I've observed, and I'm sure many others have.
Yeah.
Um, so again, Stephen Greer has been doing this for decades. Uh, Mission Rama has been doing it since the 1970s. Even before that, you had the movement in the 1950s of the contactees, where they were going out into the desert of California and using telepathy to invite UFOs and extraterrestrials out to Giant Rock. And apparently there were sightings. As far back as you go in history, there's all different versions of this kind of same thing where people are using consciousness to interact with non-human intelligence. And again, we're now we had like the generation of Mission Rama, we had the generation of CE-5. Now I guess we're in the generation of CE-5 slash psionics. Uh, so I mean, what do you think of the conversation now that we're coming to a head where it looks like CE-5 is most definitely in the forefront of the disclosure conversation?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel that there should definitely be more public conversations. I don't know if this would ever happen, but I would love to see a Dr. Greer conversation with Jake Barber. You
Right.
know, I think that it'd be good, for everyone who's in C5, because and everybody's noticed this, that there's a great deal of confusion, being that there are concerns. And so, I think it would just clear the air. I think that there are other conversations that should be had. I would love to see Luis Elizondo and Dr. Greer. I would love to see that. I think that there's a number of you know situations or conversations that should happen to kind of move the needle here on contact and everything else. So
Yeah. And regarding disclosure, there's been a lot said recently that 2025 is going to be a very like fruitful year regarding disclosure, that elements of disclosure are going to happen between this year and next year on a very serious or like even an official level. So with that in mind, why do you think that the CE5 disclosure citizens initiative is important?
well, I think first I want to say that this official disclosure, these major releases of information, I'm concerned that there may be, a false flag disclosure. That's been a concern as well, as you've known. It's been something that's been talked about for decades now. So it's just one of those things we'll have to see. And I think that the CE5 community should be at the forefront of that conversation, and that our experiences have been peaceful. Never have we ever had any kind of hostile interaction. And so I think that if it were to spin that way, the C5 community would have to be at the forefront of that and be there to say, this bullshit, excuse my language, that's a crock. And so, um, anyways, that's my position on it. I think that, the C5 community, um, ultimately is, going to be the ones who, you know, they're going to be the ones that are there for the official contact event that will eventually happen in the future with our government. So we'll see.
And I think an important element to CE5 and contact work is that, number one, you don't have to wait for any kind of official announcement in the sense of to receive your own validation of disclosure. I think there is an importance to getting the entire planet on board and having an official disclosure. I think that is important, inevitably to move forward and for the planet, this, our civilization to work on the these, the question of non-human intelligence and UFOs uh, as a whole. Like you kind of need everybody on board, and some people, for better or worse, they're not coming unless they get that announcement from people. And unfortunately, some people for whatever reason, they need the institution to dictate reality for them in some sense, and that what that is, it is what it is. So I do think that needs to happen. But I think that the more people that take this into their own hands, right? CE5 and disclosure in the sense of, if there was a concern about some kind of false narrative, the kind of best way for people to kind of undermine that kind of attempt would be to have their own line of communication with or interaction with non-human intelligence to determine the nature of the phenomenon for themselves. And I think that that idea of contact work and CE5 is exactly what could be is empowering for individuals to not to not have to, number one, wait for some kind of announcement, and number two, be at the be beholden to whatever that announcement is, meaning that whatever the disclosure is, they can kind of, as long as they say UFOs are real, that's kind of disclosure, and they can fill in whatever blanks they want after that. And I mean, I guess we're just gonna have to take their word for it, right? Unless we have our own experience, or unless we have informed ourselves otherwise. So, I think that's why these kind of citizen initiatives are so important, because you're taking the power, so to speak, into your own hands, and finding out for yourself. But I think the kind of um, benefit that's also wrapped into the CE5 aspect is uh, the human potential aspect of the conversation. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on CE5, and with that, what does that say about human potential?
Yeah, I just first want to say, to piggyback on what you were just talking about, I think that, with what we're doing, that not only is helping to raise awareness as to, some of the information that's been withheld, but also into the nature of mind. You can go down that rabbit hole in the doctor's work, but then also the contact. And so, you know, with people beginning to understand, this different, all this information, they, I think, would have the ability to discern what is truthful and what is not when, these eventual events or, release of information happen this year in 2025. So I think that, we're rather, regardless of which way it's spun, truthful or otherwise, with what we're doing, and if there's enough people, and if you're an ambassador, by the way, to those who are listening, if you are familiar with this information, feel free to reach out, join us, and let's do what we can to raise awareness, because, that's ultimately what it's going to take. Most of the people that are aware of this stuff, we didn't have a government official tell us, or, an official disclosure happen for us to believe what we were hearing, or, taken enough to at least try a CE-5 to confirm it. And we didn't have anybody, from the administration tell us this. And so, I think the same is true for the rest of the general public. If they just get enough of the information and go down the right paths, whatever paths, they take, I think that it could, bring us to a more aware society, and be prepared for that future contact, or, what have you. Um, as far as, I'm sorry, you had a question. What was your question there?
Oh, it was in regards to CE5 and the human potential aspect of CE5 is, what does the ability for us to initiate contact imply about our ability to function through consciousness, basically.
Yeah. So, consciousness, is Dr. Greer, or Erwin Schrodinger, the father of quantum mechanics, modern day quantum mechanics. So the total number of minds in the universe is one. And so it's a singularity, and that's something that's innate within all human beings. And so that ability is something that we can kind of grow on. There are these abilities that we can kind of grow, and that will kind of help propel us into a new future. Economically, um, spiritually, in every way. And so I think that the implications for our human abilities is paramount. It goes beyond everything else. And I think that that's probably the number one most important thing of all this, because when you begin to understand uh, who you really are yourself, then you kind of get an understanding of what everybody is, and that includes throughout the cosmos. So it's a huge um, part of it.
Yeah, and yeah, just a random question. Have you listened to the telepathy tapes, the podcast?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Oh wow, you man, you it's definitely I highly recommended.
The telepathy tapes.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Some of the best. I mean, it some of the best evidence or journalistic investigations into telepathy by Kai Dickens, who was following up on the research of Diane Hennessy Powell, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, who originally she was investigating savants, where a savant is an individual who has extraordinary capability, but there seems to be no reason why they have that ability, any apparent reason that they have some kind of insane function, like somebody they might be able to speak nine languages and they were never exposed to those languages in like by books or any other way, yet they can perform these kind of tasks. And there's that movie Rain Man that was kind of based off of
Kim Peek. Is it named Kim Peek, I think?
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. So, but the original researcher for that was Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, who also happens to be an advisor for Skywatcher with Jake Barber, coincidentally, and I think ultimately timely because the telepathy tapes is Kai Dickens investigating Diane Hennessy Powell's work into the autistic nonverbal community, demonstrating telepathy basically 10 out of 10. It's really incredible. And in listening to the podcast, and it was incredible because some of the way that the telepathy is being described in that podcast, I mean, is exactly in some instances how I experienced contact with non-human intelligence during my interactions, both CE-5 and events that were not CE-5 that just happened to me, you can say, part of the interactivity aspect. So, I mean, I highly recommend everybody check that out, and it's just a synchronicity or coincidence that Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, really her research became, you can say, famous in the last few months because of the telepathy tapes, and at the same time, Skywatcher's coming out, and she's partially involved with them too. So the timing couldn't have been better for that.
Where can we find this information on the telepathy tapes?
Oh, so telepathy tapes is all over. It's on Spotify. It's on every podcast. It went above in popularity and ranking beyond the Joe Rogan podcast for a short period of time. So it became the number one podcast just for a short period of time, but which shows the interest that people have in these subjects, right? If it ranked number one beyond Joe Rogan, even for a short period of time, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people with an interest in telepathy, right? And if humans, even human to human are capable of telepathy, then the idea of humans interacting with non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial intelligence through the mind, through telepathy, is not a far reach at all. And if you listen to all the testimony and go through all the literature over the last several decades, it's almost hard to come by encounters with extraterrestrials or non-human intelligence where there is no telepathy, right? It seems to be the main mode of communication every time that there's some kind of UFO encounter or an encounter with non-human intelligence or extraterrestrials, however it's labeled.
Right.
So I just think that the release of the telepathy tapes, the testimony of Jake Barber coming forward is serendipitous in timing. But I also, speaking about other projects and Jake Barber, I did want to mention the Ubiquity University event. They had a psionics summit that was today. You had to originally register through Zoom and through the website, but now it is on their YouTube channel. And I got the list right here of everybody. Jake Barber participated, Ross Coulthart, Richard Dolan, Chris Bledsoe, Jim Garrison, Bertie Jarowski, Sean Espion Hargens, Dr. Dippa Malgren, Bob Grenier, David Clements, and George Bosch. And it's about 4 hours long, and it's all about, again, psionics. So the application of psi abilities in general regarding human potential, but also in a means to interact with non-human intelligence. So, basically in that sense, CE5. And it was great to hear the discussion around CE5 or contact work or interactions with non-human intelligence from all those different people. So, I encourage people to watch and listen to that. But to circle back to the outreach, you know, where do you see the CE5 and disclosure outreach going?
Well, based on where we've already went, we anticipate it's going to grow. We're now in every continent, with the exception of Antarctica, and of course,
For now.
yeah, right. So we're just seeing how it plays out, and I say that, but really we're being proactive. We are actively reaching out to CE5 groups abroad. You can watch our videos on YouTube where we're, you know, consistently calling for people to get involved and be responsible for your community. I think you know just in the last year, I think we began this project in May of 2024, so not quite a year, and we're already on every continent, almost every continent. It's obviously there's so much room for growth. It's We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and again, I'm, as somebody who's been involved with CE5, I think, if you learn about CE5 or, if you're reading about it or if you see it in a video, it's one thing. Even disclosure say, to hear that information is compelling. But to go out and have your own experience is just there's a whole entire different quality and paradigm shift that comes with that. So, I'm optimistic, but it's also it's interesting to consider, what's going to happen when like millions of more people start doing CE5 and doing an outreach or even just participating. So what do you think are some of the potentials of like a whole mass of people getting involved in CE5?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to look at this. One of them is that there's an official disclosure. I hate to say that. I feel like disclosures already happened in so many ways, but an official disclosure from the administration where it's constantly covered and isn't, just brushed aside after a week or two. There's going to be a lot of people in the public who are going to want more answers, and it's unlikely that they're going to get more answers right away from the government after they have this, official disclosure. And so that's where I feel that many people in the CE-5 community would play their part in being able to help raise that awareness more quickly, at least. And so, I think that with the CE-5, with what we're doing, um, we're also laying seeds. Kind of like you said, it's one thing to hear the information, the analytical aspect of it. Then there's the experimental aspect of it where you actually have a contact experience. It kind of just hits at a different level. With what we're doing, laying those seeds, people have the ability to not only reach the point of having that analytical information, but then later, whether on their own accord or maybe a conversation down the road or that official disclosure, they can eventually go to the part where, hey, I'm going to try the CE-5 that I learned about or I heard about, or what was that guy was, you know what I mean? That kind of deal. So there's a number of ways that, I think that the CE-5 community is going to be responsible, and, why not start now and make yourself known in various places in your city or community, so that way when these things do start to happen, they know where to run to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting uh, what the public perception is going to be around CE5 after some kind of potential disclosure, right? I mean, even more whistleblowers coming forward and sharing their testimony in regards to the reality of uh, the phenomenon. Uh, and again, I think the more people that you have doing CE5 and having their own kind of personal transformation through that, uh, it's going to open the door for more people to participate, number one. But, if we're considering uh, what's been called the hundredth monkey effect, that, more people participating in CE5, is ultimately, by you doing the work, it's making it that much easier for everybody else in the future to participate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think like Rupert Sheldrake, the morphogenic field, right?
Yeah, right.
Um, you know, it's it's kind of it's kind of funny when you look at it from a large scale, in that way. But then you can kind of even narrow it down to, let's say, uh, your work, or in your workplace, there are certain conversations that aren't to be had. And I'm not talking about this, the whole, a huge HR type conversation. I'm talking like, there's certain conversations that are more acceptable. You know what I mean? Like than
Yeah,
others. Like
yeah.
there may be like conversations that spark in your workplace, like football, and so you start to partake in those kind of conversations more frequently. Well, the same is true for this. If there are more people who are talking about it, being involved in it, then it's more likely that others are going to get involved and start talking about it. So, I mean, I do believe that there is like this, and it's not even a belief. I mean, it's proven that, from a large scale, when, these monkeys, like you said, begin to learn a new uh, task or skill, that other monkeys that are separate from them or apart from them begin to develop that same skill without any connection whatsoever. And I think that the same is true in this, regard with contact. And when more people begin to do this, maybe even innately, they'll begin to do it, rather than overtly or intentionally. Who knows? We'll see.
Right. And I mean, I think that's just a fascinating possibility that, more people becoming aware of CE5, more people becoming aware of psionics, more people becoming aware of remote viewing, um, and participating in it even. could spontaneously make those abilities and capacities more accessible to everybody else, right? And you know, I and whether you want to just consider that an evolution in consciousness, whether naturally or if it's somehow the phenomenon like nudging us more towards those capabilities. Either way, it's just a fascinating idea, and I think you know potentially in the ancient world, right, or in past civilizations that we had those capabilities or an understanding of those capabilities as well. And I think that the idea that we have those capacities is it's almost the biggest part of disclosure, right? I mean, there's the idea of the disclosure about non-human intelligences and they're engaging with us, and there's their technology, and yeah, we have their technology, and we've reverse engineered it and such. But the disclosure of like who we are as a people, right, and what our potential is as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's crazy that there's just, I mean, there's so much going on in regard to this, uh, you know, contact and psi. Which, by the way, man, that word, it's kind of like I have like so many little pet peeves, and it's not really just that word, but like just to not to switch gears here, but like when it comes to CE-5 groups, and I don't know, and I'm sure people who are listening, you've been involved with a CE-5 group, and there's that administrator or someone who leads the C5, and they just feel like they're in control, and they want to have that, overreaching, like authoritarian type approach. And, I think that it's very important. And I always remind people of this who are new to C5 that anytime you get involved with a C5 group, or if you're going to create one yourself, to always remember to, be structured and organized, but do it in a way that's collective and unified. I didn't mean to get off course there, but I forgot what we were saying. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was talking about like the disclosure of even the human potential
Yeah.
being maybe an even more extraordinary, just as extraordinary of an idea of that we're not alone in the universe is that we have the ability to interact with reality itself through consciousness and intent, right? I think that dynamic of disclosure is just as important, right, to the conversation.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you're talking about the word "psi" over there on the shelf. I have a book by Jim Mars uh, called "Psi Spies." I forget what year it was released. It's a great book. This is kind of a side tangent, but it's Jim Mars' investigation into Project Stargate. He actually had the book ready before Project Stargate was publicly announced or admitted to, and he had the book ready 11 months before that happened.
Mhm.
And his book, the publisher, the book got blocked. Like nobody would publish it until, after the Project Stargate story came out. And then he went to publish it, and he was, of course, able to get it published then. But just an interesting note that, Project Stargate, right, which was the remote viewing program for the CIA and Stanford Research Institute, a lot of those guys that I want to say almost all of them during their remote viewing work encountered UFOs and non-human intelligence,
Yeah.
right? So it's whether you're delving into the field of UFOs or whether you're delving into research into psi and psychic phenomenon and remote viewing, you're you're ultimately going to bump into all the subjects, right? You
Yeah.
have If you're just studying remote viewing, you're gonna bump into the UFO or UAP subject. If you're, you know, studying UFOs, you're gonna bump into the psychic phenomenon where, whether it's somebody's having a contact experience and they have this telepathy with a non-human intelligence or extraterrestrial, and vice versa. So it's just they go hand in hand. So I'm really happy to see that the conversation nowadays has come to that point in a very mainstream way.
Yeah, and I want to be very careful about, my comment on psi. I don't have an issue with the term itself because it, ultimately is just psychic
Right.
phenomena,
Yeah.
what have you. But it, in the context that it's been used as of late, and I just want to see how it unfolds before I'm comfortable using that when it comes to, the CE-5, the whole contact experiences and I think the major concern really with all of that and where there's an issue is the fact of them having a venture and being willing to take down these craft to reverse engineer them. It's like, I think that it's, we're not commandeering, we're in C5, we're not commandeering vessels or hijacking of, somebody's spaceship. We're asking them if they want to land. And then, if they're, and our intent's never to, um, you, you know, learn their technology so we can share it with other countries. I mean, ultimately it is, but I don't know. We just have to see how it unfolds. So you can see where the concern comes from. Going back to my comment on that, I want to just clear the air on that. Just to kind of, change course though with the pet peeves, they're like with contact groups, and another thing that came to mind as I was saying that is, even CE-5, it's kind of like if I'm going to call you, I'm not going to say I'm going to initiate a call with James. You know what I mean? It's just like I'm going to call James. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same when it comes to this. Like, if you're going to make contact, you don't necessarily even have to use any type of terminology. It's just, you're intending on communicating with, someone else or other people. And, maybe that's just my own perspective on it. It's kind of like, people wearing a shirt or selling t-shirts with, an extraterrestrial being on it. It's kind of like if you change the perspective from a different point of view, are we going to sell shirts with someone from, people who live in the Northeast? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe not a great example, but it's just like these little pet peeves, or maybe not pet peeves, but different perspective. I guess that's all it is.
Yeah, and I think with Skywatcher, with their initiative, that there is a kind of discussion around like, well, what is their ultimate intention in what they're doing for research and development and or data collection, right? As opposed to, let's say, the CE-5 initiative, where the emphasis is on, you know, diplomacy rather than technology transfer. So, that's an entire conversation to be had, but you know, again, there it is that it is a conversation to be had. And I think that that's why the dialogue is important because I haven't heard it discussed yet. And maybe I could have missed something, but maybe there should be a facet of Skywatcher where one of their primary directives, rather than technology transfer and data collection, is to just simply focus on diplomatic interactions and bridging the gap between humans and non-human intelligence as maybe one of their primary focuses. And one thing I think about that is that I think if you're going out there with the intention of purely say a diplomatic effort and purely just to connect rather than having another motive of data collection, which is not wrong, by the way, is that you're probably going to have more success if the intention is purely for the interaction and the diplomacy aspect rather than if your ultimate end game is just for technology transfer.
Yeah.
So there is something to be said about that. But I do want to say that Skywatcher and people like Dr. Gary Nolan, and I believe Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell have stated, you know, they're not willing to participate in anything where a craft is taken down. They're only willing to participate so far in that one of these objects is asked to land, and they are participating in that way. The difference in the UFO Legacy program is that they would be lured in by these
Mm.
psionic assets and then taken down with high pulse microwave weapons or scalar weapons or whatever other instruments they use to take down craft.
Right.
Yeah, that's another question I have in regards to the success Skywatcher is going to have in having objects land is, will they be able to have an object land without it being kinetically taken down?
Right.
I'm not sure that's the case because I think
We'll see.
whatever they've been told when they were working on the range or any of these testing sites, when objects were taken down, they might have all been taken down kinetically and not psionically. But again, we're just at the beginning of that conversation publicly, at least. So I'm looking forward to where that goes. And again, it's another reason why the CE-5 and disclosure outreach is so important because there's been work done over the decades on this, but the more people that are engaged in the work, the more ready that people are going to be for number one, disclosure, but also maybe even more importantly after that is contact afterwards.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I don't just to say this, I don't want to comment too much more on anybody else's work at this time, only because, I don't want to piss anybody off. And, I'm just gonna go with what even Jake said himself. You'll know us by our fruits or whatever quote
Yeah,
he
exactly.
used.
Yeah, I
I mean,
believe
we'll
that.
we'll just have to see. But yeah, man, this outreach is, I think, very helpful. Just in our experience, if I could touch on it real quick, is when we've reached out to people, you'd be surprised how people will be receptive to the information. Most people think they'll get turned down or they won't want to have this conversation, but the fact that they even came over to you in the first place is testimony that they're interested in what's going on over here. If they weren't, they would have kept walking by. And by the way, the people who keep walking by, we consider those, a success of laying a seed because they may, walk past and this, what the hell is this CE-5 or disclosure project? You never know. But that's how our outlook is on it. And so yeah, it's just really important, that any proactive effort that you put in trying to raise awareness in this regard is paramount. I mean, I don't think that there's, in my opinion, anything more important. We put it like this. With outreach, you could be in a community, let's say here where I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We're near Kirtland Air Force Base. There are several labs. We've got the Sandia labs, we've got Los Alamos labs, we've got a number of other, sensitive facilities, White Sands down south. There are definitely connections in what, the UFO, UAP, NHI, ET subject that people who work in those places are aware of. And they just may not have a pathway to move forward. But as this grows and more people become aware and more people are demanding answers, there's no way to avoid it. So what's going to happen, we believe, is that there are going to be more whistleblowers, people around us, for example, or wherever you are. There's going to be more people, legal experts that will want to get involved. There'll be more movie and film production type people who want to get involved with this kind of, subject. There will be, more people wanting to make contact. There will be more people interested, at least, or knowledgeable of a potential or a possibility to even make contact. Like, what is this? Like, all those things will begin to happen more and more and more. And that's happening in combination, not above anything else. It's happening in combination with the ongoing disclosure efforts by not only the Disclosure Project, but people like you and I, online. And then so I think that it's just a combination of all these different efforts coming together. And I think in my opinion, and most of our opinion that are part of this, this is like the last thing. If you look back over the course of history, some of the greatest changes have occurred when large numbers of people come together and essentially demand from their elected officials or leaders that things be changed. And I know maybe not in all countries, but in the United States, this certainly has been the case. We've had women's suffrage, we've had civil rights, we've had a number of other rights movements that have occurred from, we the people. And so we feel like this is just that again. And so, um, I think it's just that additional arm to this whole process of disclosure and awakening.
Yeah, and I think that's a good note to end things on. But where could people find your work, and where can people find the disclosure outreach, and where can they find the tools to be able to participate?
Great question. So you can find us at CE-5 Disclosure Outreach on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. It's CE-5 underscore disclosure underscore outreach. We do have an app in development that should be ready in the next few months. It's going to be a platform where people can interact. They can see different ideas on how to conduct outreach. They can see some of the results of people conducting outreach. That'll have links directly to Dr. Stephen Greer's website and to other places where you can, learn more about consciousness or what have you, or other artists like Greg Braden or Rupert Sheldrake or people like that have Dr. Greer's referred to. Just to clarify, we're in alignment with the Disclosure Project, which is why we you know try and fall within what they what is within their basket of information, if you will. And we're okay with that. If you're not, then that's fine. But this is just another avenue. And if you're interested, please reach out to us. We'd love to have you. And I think your community would um, be very much grateful for your efforts, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have everything linked in the description, so people are gonna be able to take a look at everything and participate if they like. Do you have any other updates that are anything upcoming with the C5 and disclosure outreach?
Not that comes to mind right now, but when the materials are uploaded on Dr. Greer's website, it's going to be, there's going to be pamphlets, there's going to be brochures, there's going to be posters, there's going to be banners, there's going to be cards. Once that happens, we'll have it on our channels, and we hope that everyone will get some of those materials. And I do want to mention that I make absolutely no money, and nobody that's within the CE-5 Disclosure Outreach, people that are in this movement. It's not even an organization. We're not a nonprofit, none of that. We're just a bunch of ambassadors who are trying to be proactive for our own communities. We don't make any money, none. In fact, we don't condone selling anything. This isn't our work. This is Dr. Greer's work and other people like in the fields of consciousness, what have you. Like it's morally wrong to even try and make a red cent from it, in our opinion. So we don't do that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and another thing is if you do conduct a CE-5 disclosure outreach or whatever you want to call it, outreach or awakening, whatever you call it, if you have a team, just remember that it's a collective effort. We really suggest and recommend, highly recommend, to never try and put yourself on a pedestal. It's always equal. It's the only way it will work. And that's how this has been so successful, is we've always collectively coordinated and made decisions together. So
Right. And again, hopefully I'll be speaking to you again in a few months or so when the app comes out, and we can discuss that as well.
sounds good.
All right. Great
Thank-
talking with you, Nathaniel.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having
Take
me.
care.
Talk to you soon.
Yes, sir.